Welcome to the Whatcom Museum. We are about to begin our 2 p.m. panel presentation. So I ask you to take your seats and be sure to make room for the numbers of people that will be coming in about 5 minutes when we finish the panel introductions, no doubt. At any rate, I'm Chris Brewer. I'm with the education program at the Whatcom Museum. Thank you for being here. As you might know, we had a presentation at 11 a.m. today in which at least 3 of the 4 of our panelists had the opportunity to share a little bit about their programs. They are now being joined by a 4th individual who's going to share as well in the panel opportunities. Today, if you are aware of our Saturdays on Ice that have run through the length of our Vanishing Ice exhibition, today is our final Saturday on Ice. These days were focused on bringing more information and knowledge to our visitors about the topic of our icy landscapes, as well as the topic of climate change. So we've had great fun with them. We've had the opportunity to bring in scientists who shared more about what was occurring in our icy landscapes. We've heard from and seen from expeditionary artists their perspectives about our icy landscapes. Today's opportunity is to take us one step further, and that is to not leave and end Vanishing Ice, our exhibition on alpine and polar landscapes, not leave with the sense of what can I do about climate change unanswered, but instead to provide some ideas about the opportunities and perhaps the moral responsibilities that we have to do something about climate change in a positive way. What we've done is to bring together some folks who have been very committed to this topic of climate change and to the environmental integrity of our system here in Western Washington, as well as our alpine and polar landscapes. So with these experts, we have the opportunity to ask those burning questions that we might have, both about what we can do and also about some of the key issues in effective climate change actions. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like to give a couple of very basic guidelines for our panel discussion. And those are, for one, this is not a debate about the climate crisis. We are coming from the standpoint that it is indeed an issue globally at this time. So that's not going to be a part of our conversation today. We're coming from the standpoint that this is an issue. The other standpoint that I'd like to come from is finding out more. Feel free, please, to ask for what we can do and how we might move forward as a community. I also want to apologize up front for being the moderator and perhaps having to move things along more quickly than you desire, should that happen. That is the role I've accepted, and we'll try to keep things moving and still answer your questions as they come up. That's basically my guidelines. The other guidelines are that if you have a question that you would like to ask, please raise your hand and one of our interns will come forward with one of these little sheets and a pencil. You can write your question down and she'll bring that up to me. So you can at any time during this presentation raise your hand and they'll be happy to have you write down your question and bring that up. That said, I would actually like to invite our panelists themselves to introduce themselves. We're asking that they give us their name and the organization that they work with, as well as their role in that organization. I'd also like them to do the 1 to 2 minute elevator spiel so you have a sense of what it is that their organization focuses on. Just as a cue for our group here, how many of you were here at 11? Okay. How many of you are from Whatcom County? How many of you are from, wow, so the rest of you are from outside of Whatcom County? Okay.
The people who live in Bellingham somehow think they are not.
In Whatcom County. All right. How many of you are from outside of Bellingham or Whatcom County? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming the distance. So one other question, just as a guide for our panelists here. In Jill McIntyre-Witt's presentation about the Climate Reality Project, she referenced a study in which they looked at people's opinions about climate change, and they categorized them in 6 different arenas. I'm going to ask you to categorize yourself in one of 4 arenas, and whatever is true for you, please be honest with that. When you think about climate change, are you alarmed? Now, first I'll give you the list. Alarmed, concerned, cautious, dismissive. How many folks find themselves to be alarmed about the issue? How many feel concerned? How many are cautious? Anyone dismissive? All right. So you have a little bit of information about our audience, and I would like to ask you now and please starting with Jean Myers, introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your work.
All right. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so my name's Jean Myers, and I'm a professor at Western Washington University in our College of Environmental Studies, which is called Huxley College, named after Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley, not Aldous Huxley. Okay, thank you. I teach in our environmental education programs and our core program. So my areas are mostly human dimensions, although ecology and so forth are sort of one of my first loves. So I've taught environmental policy and related areas, human ecology. Most of my work in the last few years has been at the intersection between ethics and moral psychology and environmental education. I'm not speaking on behalf of my organization, but Huxley was the first environmental studies college with its own dean and faculty in the United States, dedicated just to that. So we have a raft of scientists and social scientists and some representation of the humanities within our college. We're interdisciplinary, we're applied in our focus. Western as a whole, I'm proud to say, has moved rather vigorously in the last 10 years or more towards embracing sustainability and is a regional near the front of the pack on that. In fact, we just hosted a conference the last 2 days, bringing educators from 30 or 40 institutions of higher ed, community colleges and universities around the region, just the last 2 days on sustainability in higher education. So we have people across the spectrum, not only in my little college that does environmental studies, but in the College of Business and Economics, in the arts, in Fairhaven College, in humanities. So we're very strong in that way, and we value our connections with the community very much too. We have our students out working in the community all the time. Is that good?
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Matt.
Yeah, my name is Matt Petrini. I'm the campaign organizer for a local conservation group called Resources for Sustainable Communities. We've been operating in Bellingham for about the past 30 years. We started as the curbside recycling program in Bellingham and eventually expanded beyond that to start doing advocacy and adaptive reuse work and enforcement of our environmental laws. So that's kind of what we work on generally. For about 3 years ago, one of our employees, Matt Krogh, discovered that they were trying to build a coal terminal at the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve, which we've been working for the past 10, 15 years to protect. And we began a campaign to try and stop the coal terminal from being built. That has now expanded, become a regional campaign. And so that's kind of the work that I do at Resources. I'm focused on organizing a lot of the opposition to the proposed coal terminal and building public support for blocking the proposed coal terminal. So that's kind of the focus of my work. In that role, I end up doing a lot of different things. And I also support the North Sound Baykeeper program, which is a program focused on protecting local water quality in a couple of their initiatives as well. So that's kind of where my focus comes from. We're usually our position against the coal terminal is based on a lot of its marine and aquatic impacts, but also on the impact that it would have for climate change. It represents a huge investment in fossil fuel infrastructure that is something we're trying to move past as a society, we believe, and that's kind of the basis of our opposition to the proposed coal terminal. It'd be a very large expenditure of money for something that we shouldn't be doing anymore. So that's kind of where we're coming from, and yeah, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks a lot, Chris, for having me. Matt Petrini.
Yeah, no problem.
My name's Jill McIntyre Witt, and I live here in Bellingham, and I volunteer my time. I don't have a paid job in climate change. However, I'm an environmental science major degree, and I've been passionate about taking care of the planet for a number of years, but what gets me out of bed every day is moving others to take action on taking care of the planet. So I was recently trained 2 summers ago to be a presenter for the Climate Reality Project, which was started by Al Gore, and they've trained over 5,000 people all over the world to give presentations on climate change to help educate communities on the climate change issue. I also organize with 350.org, an international grassroots organization that recently in fall of 2012 launched a divestment campaign. So I've done over 30 presentations on climate change in the community, helping to raise awareness about the coal export issue as well as climate change, but also I've done a handful of presentations on the divestment campaign from 350.org, so I'm happy to answer any questions on that front.
Afternoon. My name is Alex Rammel. I'm the Energy and Policy Director with Sustainable Connections. We're a business membership association based here in Whatcom County. Our members are about 500 locally owned independent businesses, most of them also based in Whatcom County. And our mission is to model and implement a society based on sustainable business practices. So we're helping our members implement a variety of different kinds of sustainable practices in their businesses and grow the market for similar services. So as an example, my work is predominantly focused on energy efficiency. And so what we do is we help businesses implement energy efficiency improvements in the buildings that they own and operate. And at the same time, we're creating a market for services in the energy efficiency sector. So if you're an HVAC contractor, for example, you'll be finding that more and more of your customers are asking for high efficiency furnaces or for heat pumps instead of electric resistance heat, those kinds of things. So we're trying to grow the market at the same time that we're implementing those practices. So businesses working with Sustainable Connections across the range of industries, and the kinds of practices they implement range from energy efficiency to zero waste, thinking local first. We've done a lot of work with the food and farming sector, green building, et cetera.
Thank you. We can see it's an impressive array of knowledge and expertise. And you might have noted earlier that we were to also have Eileen Quigley here from Climate Solutions in Seattle. She was caught in the airplane flight cancellations or delays on the East Coast and got in last night at midnight to Seattle. She did come actually for this morning's 11 a.m. presentation, stayed awake through the whole thing, and is headed home. So I don't blame her for that. I really appreciated her being here. As a note, this program is being video recorded. This morning's program was also video recorded, so if you missed that, you can see that shortly, I would say within a couple, 2-3 weeks, on the City of Bellingham website under BTV10, our city radio or TV station. You can also see it probably about the same time on vanishing-ice.org. So you'll have a chance to catch up with Eileen and the others. Well, thank you. I'd like to ask our first question. This was actually handed to me or given to me by a participant in this morning's program. And it really asks a question that I think is very key because it's something you all addressed this morning. The question actually is worded, and I think it's so appropriate now. Why are there so few of us here today? This morning we had about 50 all told coming and going, which was deemed to be kind of a smallish number, and yet we have even fewer right now. So in rewording that question slightly, I would ask you each to share, just very briefly, what is the most challenging obstacle for an individual to conquer in order to become active in climate change? What is the most challenging obstacle for an individual to overcome in order to take action for climate change?
I'll take a stab at that. First, very briefly, from my work up on campus organizing things, I had a fellow from Silicon Valley who helped me with this stuff, and he was very quantitatively minded. He calculated that for every person we got to an event, it represented at least 50 times the information had been disseminated. So actually, our attendance, I think, was not too bad. It represents a lot of effort in any case. Chances are, in our society, the biggest obstacle is that very few people have it in their experience base, having made a difference with a group. For the most part in our society, we approach our needs from an individual point of view. We think of our personal income. We think of government as either meddling or taking care of things for us. We're distanced from our political bodies. If more people when they were young had a strong and vivid experience of having worked together to accomplish things that they didn't think were possible, and learned how to come together and how to define a goal and maintain your group and pursue that goal, so that we all had the sense that this is not new, to have to work on a collective level to define and address a problem, even with our differences. I think we might be much further ahead, because the obstacle for most people is they feel they can't make a difference. And individually, it's easy to believe that. But it's not true, because collectively we absolutely can make the difference. That's just one possible answer.
Any other panelists have a thought?
Yeah. I think there's two big obstacles. One is probably information, like being aware of what the issue is. And I think there's actually now a lot more people are aware of climate change as a global issue, but it's harder. The science has not progressed as far to understand what the local impacts are looking like. So, I mean, we're having problems here that could be associated with climate change. It's hard to establish, this relationship between climate and weather. But as of this moment, our snowpack here in Western Washington is about 55% of average. We're actually experiencing a drought right now because we normally get a lot of rain. And making the connection is difficult, and realizing what that means for us. It's going to put a lot of stress on our water supplies. It's going to raise costs. It's going to create a lot of problems in terms of businesses being able to operate, and especially if it continues over time. So understanding what that kind of local impact is one part of it, because as much as we want people to be motivated by the devastating impacts that this is having on the ecosystem and on developing countries that have less ability to adapt to these things because of social, economic limitations, it's way easier for people to get off the couch if they know what it's doing to them as an individual. So I think that's a big part of it. The other part of it is, I think, a lot of what Jean said, which is that once you do understand those impacts, it feels like there's not much you can do, that there's not a lot of effective action that can be taken, especially as an individual, and then lacking the experience of having taken collective action. It's not a place you tend to allocate your time toward. And as I've done a lot of the work that I've done in working on this issue, what I tend to realize is the biggest limitation for people to get involved is the fact that they're just habituated to doing something else. They're not, it's not, you brush your teeth every night. I hope everyone brushes their teeth every night. It's good for you. You should do that. You don't think of activism in the same way, usually. If you do it, it's because there's some kind of extraordinary circumstances motivating you, or, it's something that's happening in your neighborhood that you're really concerned about. But it's less common for people to think of it as something that they have to take an hour and a half or something every day or every week doing. And some people are really like that. Those people are often termed activists, and sometimes they're not very well liked. But, for most people, they don't see it as this kind of everyday part of their life, and it should be. In a lot of societies, it is. A lot of times it's connected with religious institutions and societies. But for whatever reason, the idea of getting together with other people to fix social problems is less commonly part of our lives as Americans, or at least, as Americans living in the 21st century. So it's kind of an interesting question. I don't fully know how you overcome that, but maybe you need to have a doctor warning you if you don't do activism, you're going to have a heart attack or something. I don't know what the easy answer to that is.
We'll just use climate as the way we develop that.
Right, exactly. So.
Thank you. Yes.
So I would like to speak on what's happening around the world in terms of action on climate change. When I was at the training with Al Gore, there were folks from over 70 different countries, and in our training we were learning about what prevents people from taking action and the whole manufacturing of doubt around climate change. And once that creates a sense of uncertainty, then it makes people not take action. So the rest of the folks from all around the world said, we don't have that problem. We are actively taking action on climate change in our countries. And to our surprise, that was a wonderful thing to learn. So it's pretty much a problem we have in America based on the effects of the fossil fuel industry and big money. So fueling the manufacturing of this doubt. So that's really important to note. And so to overcome that, we need to obviously get informed and then take action. And of course, everything they're saying too. I do want to mention about once people start taking action, another thing is it doesn't take a lot of people to take action. So when you think of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, that wasn't everybody taking action, right? So another thing that's wonderful that I've learned from my research coming out of Yale is that the people that are alarmed across our country is roughly 16% in their most recent study. And that is larger than the amount of people that have been involved in things like gun control and immigration and health reform today. So we are building a movement, and the more people get engaged and are taking action, the more people are getting involved as well. So that's kind of nice to see. So it's happening. There's groundswell.
Great. Thank you.
So it's a little bit difficult when the question is, what's the most significant thing? And then you have to be the fourth person to answer because all the right choices have already been selected. So I'll just add another couple of thoughts, which I won't say are the most significant. But we tend to work on what you could call the low-hanging fruit. Things like energy efficiency, where there's a payback period. If you replace your heating system, you're going to get your money back eventually. So within the realm of those kinds of things, which are, what we would hope are the consensus, even if you don't believe in climate change, kinds of steps that we could take, things that will save people money. Yeah, sorry. Is that better? Okay. I was told not to get too close to it too, so I'm trying to juggle that. So within the realm of things that are kind of the consensus, things that will not come with a cost, because it's obviously a lot more difficult to tackle things that are going to have a net cost. Things that are going to save you money over time should be easier. But what I would emphasize is that for most of the businesses we're dealing with, their energy costs are about 2% of their budget. So if you say, well, we can save you 30% on your energy costs, that's not really a very big savings. And so for a lot of business owners, the issue is not whether it's going to save them money, it's how much time is it going to take. So that's an issue that we deal with. The other one in the residential sector, and also in the business sector, but looking at rental properties is extremely difficult. And every rental agreement is a little bit different, but typically what you see is that the long-term increase in the value of a property when you improve it and reduce its climate impacts, increase its energy efficiency, the long-term value goes to the owner of the property. Typically, the cost of the project falls to the owner of the property, but the savings goes to the tenant, and the improvements in comfort and livability go to the tenants. And so you have a split in terms of the costs and the incentives. And when we're trying to get projects that just barely pencil, that split incentive problem is a substantial one.
Thank you all, good insights. And I think some of this question has been answered already, but it's directed to Jean Myers, so I'll ask you to see if there's anything you would add that maybe hasn't been inferred. That is, how do you see we can move people from understanding about climate change to making behavioral changes?
Okay. I'm sure other people have in the trenches experience on that. So, gee whiz, let me just think for a sec. I think, first of all, I agree with Matt that the information available is not always sufficient to ground things out at the level that matters right here, right at home. And so the more understanding can reach that level, probably the closer it gets to action. Understanding implies, when we use it in a group that sort of agrees about this, it implies more than just the information. It implies some way that we have framed that information so that it makes the kind of difference that we feel it makes. So if you don't frame the issue such that, these days we're more or less past the argument of is it happening and is it anthropogenic. We're more onto arguments of will it make any difference whatever we do? Can't we just fix it later? And who's supposed to pay? Although there's still recidivist kind of arguments on the basics too. So framing it in a way that points to action and points to long-term commitment, I think, is important. And one way of doing that is to turn it into part of our basic social ethics. I think it's really obvious with this issue that it's not necessarily about saving the planet. That's a nice thing, but I think the planet will take care of itself over geological time. This is really a consequence of our population density and our technologies, such that we are now bumping up against each other and having effects on each other, just as if we were in a crowded gymnasium or something, trying to move vigorously. It's a matter of social ethics. And that's something that everyone understands and is familiar with from their personal experience, as long as they're not a sociopath, maybe figuratively speaking. It's a question of justice, of costs and benefits that have already been incurred and of future ones, and taking responsibility for our effects on other people. So I think that's one way that one might move towards a deeper commitment to seeing how this attaches to our very identity as moral beings. That said, I think that, and this kind of reflects on the first question too, there's no one most important thing. People have various starting points, obstacles, opportunities, and so forth. So if you look at it kind of in an analytical behavior lens, we need a variegated, wide set of tools for moving people from whatever point they may be, and figuring out what those obstacles are. Does that help?
I think it
I'm not
does
sure
help.
if that
These are tough questions, you know. I wouldn't want to be in your chair there. Along the same line, but moving a little bit further, the question has been asked, how does a little person with a huge idea get started on implementing that idea? And I'm inferring an idea that's going to be impactful. How does a little person with a huge idea get started implementing that?
Yeah.
I'm going to leave that open to whichever one of you wants to jump in.
I have a suggestion to that. Just 3 words. Go knock doors. It's one of the simplest and most effective things an individual person can do to find other people who can give them the capacity to make that idea happen. As a one individual, it's sort of like Joe was talking about. It doesn't take a lot of people, and if we simply doubled the number of people who are actively engaged in finding people that cared about the solution, the problem, the idea, we would see a sea change in our country's politics. And when I'm talking about doubling the amount of people who are actively engaged in finding new people, I'm talking about taking that number from about 0.05% to 0.1% of our population. I'm not talking about like doing a whole lot here. Because the last couple presidential elections had a certain number of volunteers who were engaged in it. And there were hundreds of thousands of them. But as a percentage of the population, it was very small. And it made a huge difference in the outcome of the election, how many people were engaged in it. So, and this was true in the Whatcom County elections here locally. It's been true for our coal campaign. I know that one of the groups that was working on the coal campaign here collected some 10,000 signatures of people opposed to the coal terminal by knocking doors, just by going out and hitting a lot of doors. And they'd walk up to people that didn't know about the issue. They'd walk up to people that knew a lot about the issue but hadn't done anything or hadn't had a way of getting involved. And they put them on a list that allowed us to later activate them and later get them involved in the actual process and demonstrate their opposition as a group in a meaningful way. And that's the same thing that could happen across the country and make a really big difference. The other thing that it's been done for every social movement throughout history. It's not written about a lot, and I don't know if that's a conspiracy to hide the tactics that work, or if it's just not particularly glamorous or not particularly innovative. You can read article after article about how social media is changing our politics, but not a lot of people write about how knocking doors is changing our politics, because it's just kind of something that's happened for thousands of years. It's not a new thing, but it really makes just a huge difference, and you can feel the change in people's consciousness around any given issue just based on whether or not it's happening in the background. So it's really interesting, and I don't know, that's one thing I'd encourage a person to do. It's just one person. She'll have more on that.
Well, I think I can answer it from personal experience because I'm one person and I had a big idea to ban plastic bags in Bellingham. And so for somebody who has a big idea like that, the first thing that you need to do is to make the commitment that you want to do that and that you're going to do it. So I had thought about it, and I had said, okay, in 2011, that was the thing I wanted to do. So first of all, making the commitment. Then you have to make a plan. You have to research and figure out, how you're going to go about it, but you have to make a plan so that you can execute it. Then you have to find your allies, whatever idea is, and you need to find out what the obstacles are so you can overcome the obstacles of that idea that you want to tackle. So the first and foremost is to just do it, but that takes commitment and belief that you can do whatever it is you set out to do. I think a lot of times people stop from taking an idea and moving to action because they don't believe that they can do it, or they don't believe that it's possible. So you have to believe that it's possible and then make that commitment to do it. And then make the plan and find your allies and your obstacles so you can overcome them.
Great.
In a nutshell.
Yep, thank you for your just-do-itiveness.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Well, I was going to say it depends on the idea.
Yeah. But I think it's true for any big idea. You gotta look at the big picture.
If the idea is one that's a business model, I would just emphasize that there's fantastic resources in Whatcom County for startup businesses. The Big Idea Lab and Small Business Development Center are great options for folks who are looking to, take an idea and actualize it into a company.
I just wanted to comment. I think the question has a problem. The problem with the question is that it seems to privilege the idea that it's going to be an individual with a new idea that goes out and does it. Maybe following up on Alex's point would be look to see who else is doing it. Okay. And there's a fabulous YouTube on the first follower effect that shows one loony guy dancing over in the gorge, and he just looks like he's nutty. And he's dancing by himself for quite a while until the first guy gets up and starts doing it with him, and then you just see it snowball. Yeah. So look for who else is doing it and join.
Yeah. That was the case with the ordinance. I found out, oh my gosh, Edmonds has already done this. So we were the first to follow. So we knew that we needed to do a really good job on it so that there could be a snowball effect, and sure enough, that happened.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
And I recognize I'm not part of the panel, but I recognize that as a Whatcom Museum educator, I can also say that if you have a big idea, please take a look at the Story of Change exhibit on the second floor of the Lightcatcher building, because the stories of change based on Annie Leonard's change process also describes a process of taking an idea from an idea into an idea an individual has to action and to success. So there are some interesting models out there. But it's key that you really think about how you're going to be active. Now, I'm sitting here holding a number of questions that are amazingly the same, but they're asked of each of your organizations. Well, they're asked of Sustainable Connections, Resources, and Western. And I'm going to paraphrase all three and ask one question. From your perspective with your organization, how can, and a lot of these are addressed as Whatcom County residents, how can Whatcom County people, that includes Bellingham and other cities, how can they become active in your organizations? What can they do within your organizations to support this? And they asked that of Western as well. How can Western actually be more a part of the county's education climate change?
I'll start. So I mentioned at the beginning, Sustainable Connections is a business membership association. So certainly anyone who is the owner or employee at a business can consider joining Sustainable Connections. But we do have a big ask for members of the community, individuals who live here, which is when you see businesses employing practices that you appreciate, show them that appreciation by doing business with them. That's that's an important part of the message that we have. If you're concerned about solid waste and you see a restaurant downtown that employs food waste recycling as part of the Towards Zero Waste campaign, make sure that's the place you choose to go have lunch when you have an opportunity to schedule a lunch date. The other thing I would emphasize is the Community Energy Challenge does work with both homes and businesses. So folks who are in a position to make improvements on their house, we have the Community Energy Challenge is operated jointly between Sustainable Connections and the Opportunity Council, and we can help do an energy assessment on your home and figure out what kinds of efficiency improvements make sense to do there. So it's not the Windows salesperson telling you need new windows and you have to then talk to the furnace salesperson and find out if that's a better deal. You get a third-party analysis of what makes sense to do on your building, and you get help with all of the interim steps, identifying contractors that are trained to do the work properly, third-party quality assurance, making sure you take advantage of the utility rebates and all of that.
Thank you. Yes, and the right. So resources.
Yeah, I mean, my development staff would probably appreciate if I said you can donate money. It's re-sources.org. It helps us continue to run a healthy campaign and continue to do the work that we do. But it also kind of depends a lot on what you want to do, because we have a lot of different programs. You can volunteer and work with what I do, which is mostly involving outreach on the coal terminal issue. We table at events like this one. Usually we have trying to collect signatures of people that are opposed to the coal terminal, things like this, and just helping out with that for a couple hours can really make a big difference. We have regular meetings. Our next one is on Monday in the evening, 6:30 p.m. at the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, and usually can get plugged into a lot of the stuff that goes on with the coal terminal there, or just kind of find out more about it. So there's that. But if you're interested in doing other things like learning how to repurpose materials, we have workshops every Saturday on that. We do things like beach cleanups on a fairly regular basis. We have a lot of citizen science work that goes on where people get trained in how to collect data about what's going on in our environment and go out and do it. So it kind of depends a little bit on what you're looking to do. No matter what you're looking to do, you can donate money to our organization. But if you're not looking to do that, you can also get involved as a volunteer in a myriad of different ways, and I encourage people to look into it more. On climate specifically, a lot of the work that I do is kind of focused on that, but we also have a lot of work that might fit a little bit better if you like hands-on stuff, if you like cleaning up beaches and doing stuff like that. We have work like that people can get involved in. Yeah, proceed.
Question, and really what I was looking for was, given that each of you have your different businesses or orientations, Western, resources, sustainable connections, climate, reality project, what can you do in terms of reaching out to be more inclusive, of to include more of Whatcom County to this climate change reality, the fact that it's happening. So it really wasn't my intention that you would tell us, this is what I do. We're a business-oriented organization, blah, 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 blah. I want to know what you can do beyond what you're currently doing to engage more of the community across the lines.
Okay, let's check in on that, answers to that question.
All right. So I got to redo on my answer too then? Well, a couple of things that we are in the midst of that I can tell you about. Within the last year, the Community Energy Challenge has expanded. It started off in 2010 and was initially offered in Whatcom County only, and we are now offering services in Skagit, Island, and San Juan counties as well. So we've now worked with about 1,300 homeowners, about 350 businesses. The majority of those are still in Whatcom County, but as we grow, a larger and larger percentage of those are in those other communities. I don't know that it really falls into the realm of inclusivity, but it does fall into the realm of going beyond. One of the things we are starting to look at is how we can offer deeper and deeper energy efficiency retrofits on buildings, and how we can work to make those kinds of improvements cost effective at scale. So the average home that's part of the Community Energy Challenge saves between 20 and 30% of its energy consumption. It is entirely possible for us to build homes that use net zero energy, that produce as much energy as they consume, and in some cases, and then some. It's a complicated thing to retrofit a house to that standard, and it's an expensive thing. But there's a lot of interim steps along the way. And so we are not satisfied with good enough, and are continually looking for ways that we can add more and more types of improvements and find ways to make those cost effective for homeowners. So look for those kinds of things. If you're familiar with the Community Energy Challenge, we have a tiered scale, tiers 1 through 5 of things you can do to improve your home, starting with, base level stuff, light bulbs, moving through insulation and air sealing and duct sealing, replacing equipment, replacing your windows, installing renewables. Start looking for tiers 6 and 7 in the coming years.
As far as Climate Reality Project, I can get to anywhere in Whatcom County, I think, within a reasonable amount of time, and I would be willing to come out to any business or, say, faith institution or school that's in Whatcom County to do presentations. You just find me at climaterealityproject.org and put in a request. I'd also come out and do a divestment talk to anybody in the county. I want to go beyond Bellingham, because I think all of Whatcom County needs to be engaged on our local issues in relation to climate change.
Yeah, this version of the question could get me in a little more trouble, because it's like my personal wish list of things our organization should be working on. There's a lot of things on that list. But I mean, one of the things that I'm hoping we're going to get more involved in the next year is the issue of oil transport through our community. I'm really concerned about that, and it looks like that is the plan. It's been kind of a long time coming, because we don't, unlike the coal terminal, which is like got this really clear, if we do this, this, and this, there's these things that we can do to just like stop it. The oil transport question is, a lot of it happens at the federal level. It's really, entrenched in nasty politics. And it's a lot harder for an organization of our size and stature, which is to say small, can engage. But it's something that I hope that we're going to take on a lot more seriously. In terms of the coal issue, we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years in this sort of bubble of, the shopping radius of the co-op or whatever, that they're really engaged, really active, and really, out there. And I'd like to kind of begin getting beyond that and start reaching people that, on the climate issue might not be their primary motivator, but when they realize what some of these other impacts of fossil fuel extraction, transportation, combustion are on them. And this is one of the interesting things we've learned a lot over the coal campaign, is that even if people aren't motivated by climate change, fossil fuels do so much damage, that just in the whole process of their existing, that you can pretty much find any reason, to despise continuing this process and, support transitioning away. And so I think there's a lot of people that can be activated that won't immediately necessarily respond to the alarm that I have around the vanishing ice, but would definitely be interested in the fact that it's going to put trains by their children's schools, that it's going to mean that it's less and less safe to eat fish that come out of Lake Whatcom, things like this that like are all caused by the same process, but it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily carry the global, consideration that climate change carries. I'm going to answer one thing for Gene, and what Western can do is take its money out of fossil fuels. It's got about 5% of its money in fossil fuels. It's something that requires a lot of community support to do because large public institutions like Western have yet to do it. But Western having its money in fossil fuels means that the endowment is essentially paying for the continued construction of projects like the coal terminal, like these oil by rail facilities. That the money that is in Western's endowment, that donors who want to support Western give to Western, is paying for these projects. And that, I think, is something that, as a university that's really focused on sustainability, needs to stop. And a lot of universities are stopping it. And the more that they can hear from the community that that's something we care about as the community that supports Western and its academic endeavors, would really make a huge difference. So those are a couple of things, I guess. I don't know. Oh, one more is that I would like to be working more directly with tribes. We've developed that relationship a lot around the coal terminal issue, but there's a tendency in organizations like ours, like we'll work with them when it makes sense for our campaign and not continue to do that. And we hear a lot from the tribe that it's a really frustrating experience, and I really want that to stop. And I think there's we have a lot better relationship with tribal First Nations than a lot of other nonprofit, because we've been working together for so many years, and we take risks on certain things that aren't real popular, like the fish consumption rate, which is going to be a really big issue. But nonetheless, I would like to see us do more direct involvement with the tribes on issues that might not be our top priority, but is a top priority for them. So, and see if there's ways that we can support their work on that. So that's kind of some of the things I'm brainstorming, I guess. I don't know if that helps.
Sure. I'll just pick up on your suggestion about Western divestment and say, just to point out the fundamental contradiction involved in funding a university which is dedicated to the future workforce and citizens of the country with something that undermines their future. So I think this is one that we will win actually fairly easily at Western, and partly because I know our students, and our students, they have the fire in the belly, and they're going to talk to each other, Facebook each other, and they won't let this one go, I'm pretty sure. What do you think, Jill? Yeah.
That Students for Renewable Energy group is one of the most dangerous weapons we have as a movement. Like they get a lot of work done. Yeah,
they do. And with continuity over generations of students, which is remarkable too, because often things don't last all that long, but that's been an enduring one that's been around probably 8 years now and started with our renewable energy fee. So, I mean, we're fundamentally in the business of taking the young people with the privilege to be in college, and often more and more of them are burdened with work and so forth at the same time as doing what they're doing, and challenging them to go beyond what they thought they were capable of. We take them out in the community, we involve them experientially, we send them out in the community. I bring conservative members of the community into my classrooms, which I find is very useful in challenging the students' sometimes somewhat insular views of what the world's like and how simple things, how easily it seems like it should go. Our students have quite a bit of empathy and ability to understand different perspectives. And I think, so, one thing we can do is just more of all of the above kinds of involvements. I've been active since about 1999 on campus sustainability issues in one way or another. One of the ones that's interesting to look at is our food acquisitions. Back in about 2004 or 5, I think, maybe it was after that. Well, there'd been grumblings amongst the disaffected about that for quite a while. The Sodexo Corporation, which was running the food services, bought Bellwood Acres apples. That was all they did. And it amounted to, 0.5% or something of their food budget. But then we got a new guy from Sodexo in, who was a fabulous man, Ira Simons. And he he was brought in actually to quit Sodexo from bleeding red ink at Western. But he listened a lot, and he heard loud and clear the motivated, activated students who wanted more locally grown, sustainably produced products on the shelves at the eateries and in the dining halls and so forth. And so I teamed up with a management accounting prof, and we worked with Ira to do what she called a big, hairy, audacious goal-setting project, BHAG, where we said, okay, our goal is to have 100% of our food locally sourced. And then we had Ira's staff and other people, and through a series of projects, we worked backwards and identified all the intermediate goals. And then Ira started whacking away at that. And within about 2.5 years, he had close to 20% of the food budget being locally sourced, which was fabulous. And, a sea change. Unfortunately, after that, and he also got, so that didn't play too well with the folks back at corporate headquarters, right? So he made Western their model case study of how to do this and participate in a national program. Unfortunately, for some reason, the university decided subsequently, for reasons they won't divulge, to switch from Sodexo. And actually, there were students who opposed Sodexo because of their reputed labor practices elsewhere, to switch from Sodexo to Aramark. And frankly, in terms of the human rights issues, there's no difference between these big, mass food distribution things. And Aramark has made much more tokenistic efforts along that lines, and I think this year we're actually starting to see some stronger student activism crop up around that. There's a lot of interest in food and food systems among at least the slice of students that I see, and there's an awareness because it touches health as well as environment, as well as climate change. So all those efforts need to be made much more visible and penetrate much more deeply with linkages to the community. For example, and my wife works with farm to school projects with the 8 school districts, including the Lummi schools in the county. One of the big roadblocks is we don't have many food processing facilities in the county. Right. So for example, Draper Valley chickens have to get sent down to Everett to be processed, and then back up here if you want locally grown poultry. And there's action now towards, these facilities tend to be more or less single use or 2 or 3 uses. It's hard to get a really multi-purpose type of facility just because of health regulations and so forth. But we're seeing some movement now. There's a proposal that's going to move forward for one food processing facility in the county. The whole idea, obviously, is to use large institutional buyers, school districts, Western, the hospital, and so forth, as leverage points for local produce and foods, as well as subsidized farming, growing season extension techniques, in other words, greenhouses and so forth, different food crops and so on. So, on the operations side, there's progress and could be more, but So that's part of the answer, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you for the clarification on the question. It's very enriching, and I appreciate your input back. I know that we are at about 3 o'clock, so I'd like to see if we can ask our most important questions in the next 20 minutes. That's difficult for me to know here, but I do have a couple that are ones that I'd like to address to Matt. Matt, what is the status of the Cherry Point Terminal and the ecological impacts of that?
Oh boy.
Yeah, this is a hard one in 20 minutes, so I know that it's a big question.
Yeah, the second question could be like an hour and a half long presentation, but I'll address the first one really quickly because I think I can do that relatively quickly, which is that it's currently moving through the environmental review process that's associated with its permit. Under our state and federal laws, before you do a project of this magnitude, you're required to go through a series of studies. And most recently, and the public, under our state laws especially, the public is allowed to have input on what they believe those studies should include. So we just finished the process of determining that, which is called scoping. It's the scope of the environmental review, called an environmental impact statement. And the scoping process concluded with a pretty record turnout. Like normally in a scoping process, you see a couple environmental organizations, a few other government agencies or tribal governments, and the occasional really interested activists submit comments on how they feel, what they feel should be included in the scope of these studies. And in this, and it's usually like 7, if that. A lot of times it's 0. And that's the amount of comment that you expect to receive. In this particular project's case, it received something like 124,000 comments, and 12,000 people turned out to hearings across the state to speak out about what they believe the study should include. So as a result of this kind of unprecedented level of engagement, what we see is an unprecedented proposed scope for the environmental review. They want to consider everything from the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the coal throughput to the rail impacts all the way through the state. There's notable stuff that people asked to have included that isn't being included, like the impacts of mining the coal in Montana and Wyoming. They left that out of the study. So there's going to be eventually another opportunity to comment on those things that are left out and to say we'd like you to go back and include those things. So where it is right now is that's been completed. The agencies who are conducting that review have established kind of broadly what's going to be in the scope of that review, and they're right now pursuing the contract to actually do that review, which once it's signed, will be a 13-month process. That's in the next couple months or so, hopefully, they would sign that. The challenge with it has been that the county council and our local government has not been able to have a lot of input over what those contracts include or require. So on next Tuesday, February 11th, an ordinance is going to be introduced to allow the county council to have oversight over that process, which would be a really good thing if they did, because they're the ones ultimately who are going to be using this review to make their decision. And so they should be able to say to some degree what they want to make sure that review includes, or at least be able to be aware of what they're contracting for it to include. So that's kind of where it's at. So once that part gets straightened out, about a year and a half, there will be a published draft environmental impact statement, which will review all of the potential environmental impacts. And then the public will have another opportunity to weigh in on whether or not they believe that study was adequate, or do they believe it should go back for more study. I already know there's a couple areas where it's not going to be adequate just based on what they've said they're going to review. So there's kind of already something we can prepare for there. So that's kind of where the coal terminal process is. After it gets through all of those studies, it goes to the Whatcom County Council to be voted on whether or not they receive this major project permit, shoreline substantial development permit, And then it goes to a series of federal and state agencies who also have to issue permits. And then it has to receive a title lease. And so if it gets through all of that process, I'm guessing there's going to unfold into crazy lawsuits, and then there'll be that, and who knows what after that. So it's hard to say like where it ends, but it's currently in the process of this environmental review. In terms of the ecological impacts, there's a lot of local economic impacts, like things like the train traffic and stuff. But the concerns that we have ecologically is the way that it disrupts the ecosystem of the site. The site is a designated aquatic reserve by the state. It's a herring spawning ground. It's where the herring come in to lay their eggs and then reproduce, and then the salmon eat the herring and the orca eat the salmon. So the herring is a really critical species, and this particular herring spawning ground is really important because they spawn at a different time than most Pacific herring, which was actually the source of trying to get them listed on the Endangered Species Act. It was under the Bush administration, so it didn't get very far. But they're the only herring that spawn in the spring, so they support a whole population of salmon that spawn at a different time than most of the salmon, and without them it collapses. It also brings a whole lot of vessel traffic, about 487 vessels making 970 transits through Puget Sound. And the vessels are very large, and they take a long time to stop. They take about 5 miles to stop. And unlike oil tankers, are not required to have tug escorts. So one of the things we'd obviously like them to have is be required to have a tug escort. But in addition to that, it presents a lot of risk of accidents, a lot of risk of spills, both of coal and of the bunker fuel and the oil that is used on these ships. If they run aground, if they collide with other ships, if they are unable to navigate in and out of the pier. These concerns are a lot of the ecological concerns. And then obviously there's the concerns associated with coal itself as a product. When it goes over and gets burned, it's the number one contributor to climate change is burning coal. So there's the climate concern that's probably a reason a lot of people are here today. But it also results in the deposition of a lot of really harmful chemicals, both into the local environment where it's burned and all over the world. About 15 to 30% of the mercury that's in Lake Whatcom comes from burning coal in China. So there's a lot of these kind of air quality, water quality concerns that are associated with burning the coal. Mining the coal is not a pretty process either. It usually involves the destruction of entire rangeland ecosystems. They have to just dig up the entire rangeland, they put it in a pile, they dig out all the coal, then they try and put it back. The coal itself has a lot of these heavy metal impurities that then get into the water and get into the soils of those local ecosystems. And when they put back the rangeland, it never, at least so far, has regained the same ecological value that it had before they dug it up. So those mining concerns are a big part of it too. So there's more, but that's kind of the short synopsis of things we're worried about.
Thank you so much. And since you're still not out of breath and you're on a roll, another question for you is, in terms of the coal train, what are active steps that community members can make to support the opposition?
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that we're going to start doing in the next few months or so is trying to press on our local county government to take a more active role in advising and in controlling and paying attention to the environmental review. Up until recently, the strategy of the county government has been to really take this back seat and just sort of let the process happen, and when it's done, then they get to weigh in. And it's sort of been the legal advice they've been getting. It's sort of what the structure of our current county ordinances allow. But all those things can change. And the county government, if it's encouraged to do so, could be more actively engaged in the process of reviewing the terminal, which would benefit all of us because we would have better information about the impacts that it's going to cause. The county government would be more informed when they're making the decision. And then ultimately, we'd be making sure that the effort, the energy, the public input that is going into that review process is actually more meaningful, that it's actually being taken under consideration. So that's one of the big things that I would really encourage community members to participate in. There's, the first ordinance along those lines is being introduced on Tuesday. There's going to be a public hearing after that. These are things that would be really important for community members to attend, to at least be paying attention to, but to voice support for is a big part of it. In addition to that, we're going to probably continue to do outreach work in the community to find new people who support what we're doing, or people who haven't heard about it to be educated about why we're concerned, and to begin supporting what we're doing. So there's a lot of things associated with that. A lot of times that involves, tabling at the co-op, for example, for a couple hours, or at other local businesses that are willing to have us. Going and talking to school organizations, neighborhood organizations, some of the work like Jill does. Even if you just know people in those organizations that are able to arrange for a presentation to that organization about what some of the concerns are, that helps a lot. And then there's, knocking doors and going to certain neighborhoods where we expect people haven't heard as much about it or haven't been engaged in it as much in the past, and telling them why we're concerned, and just asking them how they feel about it, and if they formulate an opinion on it, and trying to find the people who share our values on it so that we can begin to have them engaged in the process and be updated on the process, and take an active role in making sure the environmental review it addresses their concerns in some way, or at least makes the elected officials aware of what their concerns are. So those are some of the things I can think of maybe off the top of my head. If you're interested in being involved in any of those things, we have a meeting on Monday night. We also have an email list that people can sign up for at re-sources.org that keeps you engaged and informed in some of those next steps. So that's kind of, I guess, where to go with that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Getting the word out is always a concern. And I think I have this question, maybe.
That's my question. I want to change. What I've found is people kind of feel like they're holding back the dike. And is there a way that we can show more people progress? I mean, while all the glaciers are melting, right. So I also work on the Duwamish and cleaning up the Duwamish, and it's amazing. It's really coming back. And how can we show them the progress that's being made so they can feel like they're not just spinning their wheels? Because the culture,
yeah.
Is there a way that we can do that? Because I think there's a lot of people that feel stagnant, that it's just going to happen. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Is that on the Coltrane specifically, or do you mean on?
I think that's a
well, no,
generic
not
question.
necessarily the culture, but just where can they get involved, where they'll make a difference, rather than just writing a check? Because I think people want to do more than write a check.
Yeah, no.
I can speak from one of the things Climate Reality Project encourages is for people to engage in the conversation with anyone. It could be your neighbors, or your coworkers, your friends, politicians, about climate change, for example. That's what we're here talking about. As far as showing progress, one of the things that we suggest is using social media. And anytime that there's news or information on progress, that we be posting those, resharing and posting those articles, because you bring up a very valid point in that people need to know that we're making progress. And so that's one way we can. I know for me personally, I get a lot of feedback from people saying, thank you for the posts that you post, because it shows that we're making progress. So that's one thing. But in terms of, say, an example like the coal export issue, is we also need to be posting articles of progress of things being stopped or halted, or this action step was taken by these leaders. Every single thing that we do is progress in those regards. We tend to not celebrate those things, so that's a common, yeah,
Right.
it's always the next thing. So it's really important that we do take time to be sharing the good news too, or even if there's say a coal ash spill in North Carolina, and here's what they're dealing with in that community. It helps people here know, okay, wow, there's other communities dealing with really big issues. I better stay abreast of what's going on here, because we don't want those. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, right.
So anyway, I just would encourage people to just use social media and their voices in real life conversation too. But, yeah.
So the responses to that question.
It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, right? Because when you've prevented a problem, you don't see it.
Right.
I mean, that's in the work around energy efficiency in particular. We often run into this, which is the best thing you can probably do to your house if it's not well insulated is insulate it. And then we try and get people excited about showing off their insulation project, and you can't see it, and even if you can, it's not at all sexy. Mm-hmm. It's not interesting.
But what's interesting is the amount of savings they've saved.
Right. So to some extent we can make those things interesting by aggregating them. So if we talk about, we've now worked with 1,300 homeowners in the 4-county region and 350 businesses. That's more than 1,000 energy efficiency projects. And numbers like that maybe start to get interesting. The other thing that, it isn't at the top of the list, but visible items like putting solar panels up makes a difference, right? If you see a solar array on somebody's home, you can, even though they might have been able to save more energy by insulating the attic first, hopefully they did insulate the attic too, but those kinds of visible steps do make a difference. And it's important to have those visible opportunities because we're social creatures, because peer pressure works, because when you see your neighbors doing something, you at least consider whether you should do it yourself too.
Thank you.
I think you want to be careful to not communicate the idea or the perception that things are always just bad, or
right.
that problems are the main situation, because that just normalizes it and makes it a norm that's where we are. We want to normalize all these successes. And one little way to do that is, suppose you're working on a long campaign and you're going to be in it for the long haul. Well, you break it up into goals, that are, you can achieve, and they're meaningful, and then you've reached a goal. Indeed, you're going to keep on going, but then you've got a point that you've reached something. You celebrate that. You create a community that celebrates it together.
Yeah, and I think it's the same kind of thing. I mean, with 3 of these coal terminal proposals that, like, when we originally started all this, there were like 7 or 8 proposals, and 3 of them have been blocked already. They've been stopped in their communities. One in Grays Harbor, which went down a little over almost 2 years ago now. The largest one was blocked last March in St. Helens, Oregon. And a lot of the reason that happened, all those ones that were blocked because of investors pulling out, which is the most common and fastest way that these projects stop, is that the investors realize that it isn't worth their time to continue down this crazy rabbit hole. And we saw this with the Cherry Point terminal very recently. Goldman Sachs, which is the largest and most well-financed investor there is, decided that this wasn't worth their time to continue fighting this fight up here. They sold it off to a lot more risk-embracing investor that is still pretty well financed and, in a lot of ways somebody we should be concerned about. But the fact that they no longer have this partner that is Goldman Sachs is going to make it a lot more likely that this project is not going to happen, and also indicates the impact that all of these people getting involved has had. Like I mentioned earlier, we had this 124,000 comments. For the Longview terminal, which is south of Seattle, they had 209,000 comments. We had this 12,000 people turn out to hearings. That didn't happen because I sent out an email or because, there were TV ads, because we didn't have TV ads really. That happened because a lot of individual volunteers got involved and spent a couple hours trying to find other people and get them involved. It happened because of people taking action. And you don't see that kind of thing happen unless people take action. So I can definitively say that everybody who spent any time at all working on that made a huge difference. And that seeing all that come out in the media, we got like all these people turning out to hearings, all these people making comments, is, investors look at that, and we make an active effort to make sure they notice it, and they go, this is going to be hard. These people don't want this. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to be difficult. And so people are making that kind of difference. And now what we're starting to see is it's starting to ripple into the actual political sphere, where people are winning and losing elections based on whether or not they're associated with these coal projects. Legislation is either proceeding or stopping based on whether or not it's associated with these coal projects. And so the more people begin to be aware of it, the more of a liability it becomes for elected officials to support it or to even just be indifferent to it. And we saw that recently with Whatcom County elections. There were 4 candidates that were heavily supported by the coal industry, and they did not. 2 of them were incumbents, and they both lost their seats. And that was because a lot of these people were doing the same things that they were doing on our campaign, which was getting involved and spending time making sure people knew, first off, what the issues were in the election and were voting in the election, which in one of those local elections can be really, really tough. They usually have really low turnout. But we had the highest turnout in the state in that last election as a county. So it really does make a huge difference, and it has an impact on whether or not these things move forward. And we've already seen how they can be stopped by this kind of personal involvement of people. So, yeah, it's not. It doesn't get out there a lot. It really needs to.
Gene, you had a comment.
Just one comment. Nordhaus and Schellenberger, in their piece a few years ago about the death of environmentalism, pointed out that Martin Luther King didn't get up at the March on Washington and say, "I have a nightmare." In fact, he did start with a nightmare, but what became the monumental line from that was, of course, "I have a dream." And so I think the more we put all the small pieces together into a larger encompassing dream is a good word. What are the dreams we walk around with, their aspirations, the visions that we have for a better future? Use some of tap into the best in people, tap into what they really aspire to, identify these projects with that. They're small battles, but they're part of a much larger vision, and I think the more we can encompass things that way, our legacy, the world we're leaving for the future, the ways we've improved right now, I think that is a very important strategy to keep in mind.
Very powerful. What a powerful way to end our forum. Keep a hold of your dreams for our future and our children's futures, and remember that people taking action make a difference. So thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you for your questions and for being here and knowing that you are the people that can make a difference. Are we closing remarks? Actually, what I'd like to do, because it is...
Only because there was something I really wanted to say to one of the questions that
we'll have a closing remark, and then what I would suggest is that we could end the forum and you could still be available for others if they have questions. Okay.
Well, back to, it ties in what Jean was just talking about and what Matt was just talking about that one question about how do you have an idea and you put it to action? And one of the things that I keep thinking about is find somebody to do it with. Now, I talked about the bag ordinance, and I shared that I wanted to do this with somebody who said they wanted to do it too, and that was Brooks, and she's in the audience. And what I want to say to that is, whatever it is you want to do, find somebody to do it with. So if you want to do smart trips, for example, talk with your friends and say, hey, I want to do this. Do you want to do it too? And then you have like accountability partner to hold each other accountable to your actions. Because it's really hard to get up every day and say, I want to take action on something, but it's so much easier if you have somebody to do it with, or multiple people to do it with. And I just wanted to add that one piece.
That's an excellent point to add.
Find a sponsor.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't want that to be left unsaid, so thank you.
Well said. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being here.